record on this computer. Okay. All right. Hopefully I'm recording. Anyway, welcome. This is a training for contract, for the NEFAR contract. And we're going to go through the NEFAR contract as fast as I possibly can. I don't know if we can cover it all in an hour. Let's see. We're starting with the MLS. And I'm going to give this same introduction that I give in my class. Most of you have heard it, some of you haven't. When you're in the MLS and you want to start a contract, you can go to menu and you can go to contracts, or excuse me, where is it? Where is it in the menu? It is under applications. Okay, form simplicity, that's where we're going. If you put the gold star there, that's going to put it up here at the top. Okay, so that's where we're going to go. So I'm going to click on my form simplicity here, and I'm going to admit. Here we go. And it's going to take me out to form simplicity. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, thank you, Carrie.
Yeah.
I've got everything shut down on my computer but this, so it should go reasonably okay. Okay. Now, when I was, hi, Nana. So now we're up to 10 people, I think. Okay, so I set up this transaction just for this training. If you were going to start a transaction, you would come over here and start a new transaction. You usually use the property address name and create a transaction. Not too hard to do. Oh, there's Kim. Look at this. Man, I feel popular now. Okay, so there's Scott. Okay, so we're now in the transaction, and the first thing that you would do once you're in the transaction, now I've already added a purchase and sale agreement. To add a blank form, now there's two things you can do. You can set up a forms package, which you can put the documents in that you want to use for a particular transaction. Just the blank documents, and save that as a package. And then you can just go to the forms package and get that package and drag all that down at one time, or you can pick forms from the package and drag them across. The second way is to actually find the forms. And you can do that by going here, and we're working on the NEFAR forms. So we're going to go to Northeast Florida. Let's see who we got out there. Admit all. Special welcome to Barbara Colvin. Good to see you in here on this. Okay, so then we're going to, after we've picked the board, we're going to go over here, and all you got to do to find a purchase and sale agreement is to just put in a keyword purchase and click this, and there's your purchase and sale agreement. You mark that and then add to transaction. Oh my. And you'd add that to the transaction. We've already got it in the transaction, so we're going to go there and open it. But I just wanted you to see the navigation of getting there. Okay, and if anybody missed that, we are recording this, so you'll be able to go back and get the intro if you need to. Okay, so now we're opening the purchase and sale agreement as if we were going to edit it for a customer. And you'll notice that you have, as soon as it loads, there's Felicia. Okay, there's the purchase and sale agreement. And you'll note when you're in this mode here, you've got a save button, you've got a print button, and an X out. So in order to save what you've done and go back to the transaction, you would save it and then X out, and it would take you back to the transaction. Okay. Now, we're not necessarily going to fill this out. We're just going to talk about what does it say. Okay, buyer's purchasing, or buyer purchaser, and those are the names of the buyer purchaser go on line 1 and 2. Name is reflected in government issued ID. This is the name that they're going to want on the title, folks. So if they don't, like for instance, I buy everything in Jeff Burgess, no middle initial. When I sign, it's squiggly lines. You can't tell what my name is. So it doesn't matter. If they put Gerald Jerome Philadelphia III on there as their name, that's what they're going to have to sign when they go to closing. Okay, so when you're putting a name on here, you want to advise them, how do you want it to read on the deed and how do you want to sign your name in the transaction at closing? Because you're going to have to sign well over 100 pages. Okay, so that's the name that goes on the contract. Okay, if they are husband and wife, you want to indicate they're husband and wife. Husband and wife get special title dispensation. Okay, they can take it as tenants in the entirety, and when the husband dies, it's all the wife's, and vice versa. Just keep in mind that river flows both ways. Okay, so that's something that title can talk to them about. How do they want to take title, or you can tell them. If it's just two individuals and they're not married, then they can only get tenants in common. Okay, they can't get tenants by their entirety, and there are benefits to tenants by the entirety because it avoids probate. And it's asking for the marital status. Okay, if they are a married couple, you would put John Smith and Delane Smith, a married couple. Okay, and then the seller is whatever the seller is shown on the property appraiser's website. And it may not include all the sellers. It may say something to the effect of et al. And when you see that on the property appraiser's website, that means there's more people. Et al. Means there's more. Okay. And then what does it says? As reflected on the deed of the government issued marital status of individuals. And the thing that's on the deed is what you're going to see on the property appraiser's website. Okay. Which terms may be singular or plural to include the successors, personal representatives, assigns buyers and sellers. That means if you've got a buyer and the seller dies, what happens? This contract buys his successors. Okay. If somebody transfers a property while you have it under contract for sale, what does that mean? That means that the successor has the obligations of the seller under this contract. And they can only receive such rights as they have, and part of their rights are encumbered by this contract. Okay. I hereby agree that the seller will sell and the buyer will buy the following described property as all improvements upon the following conditions and completed marks and conflict conditions that will be added to supersede that which is originally printed or marked. So if you're marking something up, if you're changing, if your buyers or sellers are changing something in the contract, then it's going to supersede the original language in the contract. If you write an addendum to this contract, it supersedes what's in the contract. And that includes things like the HOA disclosure or CDD. You know, if you're writing something that or if you're writing something in a CDD that contradicts something in the contract, that writing is going to take precedence over what's originally printed in the contract. Any questions about up through paragraph through line 9? Okay. Line 11, you're going to put in the street address in Duval County or whatever county it's in. The tax ID number. Does everybody know what the tax ID number is? It's different in different counties. Okay. That's how you're going to identify it on the property appraiser for that county's office. And the legal description. I'm going to show you real quickly how to find a legal description that you can use. It's not the correct legal description, but it's something that you can use. Now I'm over here in my MLS. I'm going to go to my active listings. Okay, and then I'm going to just go to this listing. I'm going to open this listing. Okay, and then I'm going to go to the tax info tab right here at the top, tax info. And when I open that up, this is the easiest place to find it. Okay, you'll see right here, it says legal, and then it has this shorthand legal description. That's all you're going to use on the contract. This is specific to this property. If you're including the tax ID number, which is, where is it? Yeah, I would draw a blank, right?
It's up.
You just crossed it, Jeff.
Office building.
There you go.
There it is. Okay. ID, parcel ID. So this is the number that's going to identify it. And if you use that combined with this legal description, you can't go wrong. Okay. So I just copy this and then I go back to my purchase and sale agreement and I paste it right there. Okay. The property will convey statutory general warranty deed to trust personal representatives or guardian's deed as appropriate. Status of the seller, subject to current taxes, existing zoning, restrictive covenants governing the property, easements of the record which affect marketable title. Seller represents the seller has legal authority and capacity to convey the property, and no other person. Here we go. And no other person or entity has ownership interest in the property. Now, if you have a husband, he's signing, and then all of a sudden you figure out that the wife lives in the house, she has a homestead equity interest, even though she's not on the deed. She has to sign. If she lived there and moved out, and now they're divorced, the same thing could be true. She could still have a homestead equity interest. Okay, so you may have to sign. That'll be something that you're going to describe that as best you can to the title company and let them decide who's going to sign. Okay, for the purposes of this contract, if you have to add somebody after you've written a contract, you're going to write an amendment. Okay, you're not going to write a new contract. Why not? If you write a new contract, could void the old contract and all the terms and conditions go out the window. Okay, so you don't want to do that. You want to write an amendment. Once you have it nailed down under contract, both parties have signed, it doesn't matter if there's something in the contract that has been omitted or left out on purpose, it's still a contract. So then to fix that, you want to use an amendment. You do not want to go back to the original contract and start monkeying with it, because you could void the contract inadvertently. So you're always going to use an amendment. Okay. Under Florida law, and it describes right here the spouse rules. Okay, under Florida law, the sale of principal residence requires seller's spouse to sign the deed, even if the spouse's name is not on the seller's present deed. Because many times people own property, their spouse died, they got married again, moved into the property. Now you have a different heir, a different owner. Okay. Binder deposit be paid herewith due in X number of days. I always put 2 or 3 days there to allow this contract to get signed and cured a little bit, and then they're going to bring the binder by the office, and that's what you want to put in there. What is a normal binder you put on a contract? 3 what?
Day, business day.
No, that's the timing. How much? How much?
1%.
Who said that?
Carry.
Good work.
1%.
1%. Yeah, 1% is kind of a rule of thumb. We had a situation the other day where we put in $1,000 on a $400,000 house. They came back with a counter offer and they said, well, no, we want $4,000. That's 1%. And so that's what you'll run into. And keep in mind about the binder deposit. If you're the listing agent and the buyer defaults and the seller keeps the binder deposit and it's $1,000, who gets it? Anybody? Who gets it under our listing agreement?
It's split between the broker and the seller.
Yeah, she's beginning to remind me of Sheldon Cooper. She has all the answers.
I'm a good parrot, Jeff. You told us.
You're right. You're right. It gets split between the broker and the seller, and it's in the listing agreement that we get half of all retained binders. Okay, so when you're putting that number in there, make sure that you get enough to cover your trouble, because we're going to get paid by that if the buyer defaults. Okay, and we'll talk about more of that in the default paragraphs.
I have a quick question.
Yeah, question.
So, when you say that it's due within 2 to 3 days, I mean, what's the difference between 2 and 3 days?
It's
Or
two,
does
no,
it-
it's 2 days,
Oh, 2 days.
or it's 3 days. It's not 2 or 3 days. Okay,
Right, but
because
what-
2 or
what
3
would-
days would be ambiguous.
what
Huh?
would be- Why would you make 2? Why would you make it 3? Or it
I've
doesn't
no,
matter?
no reason.
Doesn't
There's
matter.
no reason.
Okay.
I'm just saying, that's what you can use. If you use 2 days and it's Monday, you're fine. If you use 2 days and it's Friday, that means you'd have to pay it on Sunday. And what if the banks aren't open? They can't get you a check or whatever.
Okay, so it would depend on that.
Yeah, that might be an issue, but you want it to be quick enough that the seller's not gonna, it's not like 10 days. You don't want the seller to be concerned about accepting your offer because they may never pay the binder. Okay? Anything that you do, small binders far away are going to stink up the deal to the seller. Okay?
This is an interesting question, maybe. What would you count as like receiving the binder? Like if someone wanted to back out, and they didn't think the binder was put in yet, I'm asking.
We're gonna get to that. Okay? It doesn't matter if they pay the binder or not, they're still obligated to pay it, even if they default. Okay? So they could be sued for that binder. Okay? The main thing that you want to do, regardless of the fact that your binder is the buyer is your mother or your dad or your baby brother or whoever, you want to collect that binder. Okay? Because they're in default on the contract if they don't collect the binder. Okay? Now, additional binder, in some cases, you're going to pay additional monies after something happens. Maybe after you get loan approval, you're going to pay additional monies. You would put that there. All of these monies should add up. If you put in $4,000 binder and a purchase price of $400,000, do you have to fill in all these other lines to make it a contract? No. The answer is no. You can write it on a fish. You can write $400,000 on a fish. As long as it's got a date and both parties sign it, then that's a contract. Okay. But you don't necessarily have to fill out all those blanks. Now, you will get the occasional old school agent that says, oh, you have to put so much here and so much here and so much here and so much here. What does that mean to you? Just do it. Don't argue with them about it. It's still going to be a contract. They're probably doing it right. You may learn something. So cooperate. We are cooperating brokers after all. Okay. Okay. So the next thing you look at is proceeds of a note or mortgage. This is executed by the buyer. This is a third party mortgage. Okay. It doesn't include any of the closing costs. It just includes the mortgage amount. Okay. It includes the note amount. Okay. And so if it's $350,000, put $350,000. Again, it doesn't include any closing costs. Then the seller's financing, if the seller is financing, you would put that amount here. And then if you take this amount minus the proceeds of the mortgage, minus the purchase price, you're going to come up with the balance due at closing. Again, a mathematical calculation, and that's what goes in this line. So this plus this plus this should equal this. Okay. All right. Binder deposit to be held by. You notice it doesn't say who the closing attorney is. It says binder deposit to be held by. It used to say escrow and title and all that. And the reason it doesn't say that anymore is it confused people. They thought you have to give the binder to the title company. A lot of offices don't want to be responsible for binders. What's the one thing that a binder does?
Give a promise.
It gives a promise. Yeah. If you put the binder with a real estate office, what does that give you that it doesn't if you put it at a title company?
Freedom.
It gives you the opportunity in case of a binder dispute to settle it using an EDO from FREC. It has to be at a real estate company. Most real estate companies don't care about their customer or their cooperating customer. And they say, we're not holding it, we'll just give it to the title company. Well, if there's a binder dispute, now the attorneys are going to get some of that money, probably all of it. Okay. And the people are going to be out. So if you care for your customers, you insist that it be at a real estate office. That way you can get a get out of jail free card. You can present all the facts to FREC, and about 2 or 3 months later, they're going to give us back an EDO that says the money goes here. And then once you follow that, you are indemnified under this contract. Okay? If you don't follow that, then you could be liable for the binder, and you could also be liable to be sued. In addition to all that, there's a $50,000 fund that protects us from lawsuits regarding binders when we follow the EDO that's provided by the state. So, okay. So you want to put Century 21 in the Lighthouse Realty. I don't care if it's here or at the other office. You want to protect your customers. You want to use that office, and you can explain it to the cooperating agent, because a lot of people think, oh, if I give it to the real estate office, they might cheat or do something sinister with that binder. You know what? We're supervised by FREC. I have to sign every one of the reconciliations every month for our escrow account. Do you think I'm going to risk my license and all of this that I've built screwing with a few dollars in an escrow deposit? Absolutely not. So
Jeff, should that be your name then?
no, it should be Century 21 Lighthouse Realty.
Okay, and then the main office phone number, and then what email would you put down?
Use admin@c21jax.com.
Okay.
That's a shared email between Karen and I, so we see what's going on there. Okay.
Not checks, right?
It can be, it's not really an issue unless you've got a 10-day closing. Because we're going to deposit that money. It's going to be in our account for 30 days. So it can be a personal check. It can be a cashier's check. It can be money orders. It can be just, all that stuff, but cash, because it's going to sit long enough that it's going to cure. If it were a bad cashier's check, it would pop out and we'd know it. If you're concerned, or if the person's in another state or anything like that, have them wire it. Karen will give them wire instructions. Okay. That's the easiest, simplest way, because then we know we got it. Okay. Any other question? Okay. Now note what it says on line 45. It says, in the event of a dispute between buyer and seller regarding the entitlement to the binder deposits held by an attorney or a title company, the brokerage resolution remedy referenced in paragraph 12A hereof is not available. That's an EDO. They're saying if you give it to the title company, no EDO. They're even warning you right here on the document. You can refer your cooperating broker to that passage and say, look, now we're not going to have a binder dispute. It's very rare. We have 1 in 100 transactions will have a binder dispute. Okay. And in that 1 out of 100, we want to have the best resolution possible, and that's an EDO. A lot more work for me, but a lot less money for your customer. Okay. All right, financing. Paragraph 2. We are going to have the customer pay cash.
Jeff, this is.
Yep. Question.
I do have a question. This is Anthony. I just, for clarification, you said when I do get the binder, it goes to Century 21 Lighthouse. Did I hear that correctly?
You would have the check made out to Century 21 Lighthouse Realty, or if they prefer, who's the broker on the other side of your transaction?
Berkshire.
Berkshire. If they prefer to keep it at Berkshire, that's fine, but you ask them to have it at one or the other. We want it at a real estate company. We don't want it at the title company until we're, and what happens is when it goes to closing, we write a check to the title company from our escrow account. Usually it doesn't even have to be a cashier's check. They take it from us because they know us. Okay. But we do that a day or two before closing. We hold it up until the point where we see everything's going through and everything's going to work. Okay. Now you may get pushback, and they may say, no, absolutely not. We're not going to make that a term and condition of our contract. If you're saying that Century 21 has to hold the binder, then we're not going to accept your offer. Don't go there. Okay. Just tell them, well, would you rather hold it at your office? And if they say, yes, that's fine, then go with your contract. If they say, no, we have to put it at the title company. And if they say that, then it has to go to the title company. You're not going to give up a contract over that. but you're going to give your best efforts to protect your customer and their customer. Okay? Any other questions about binders? Moving on. Okay, financing, cash, loan without contingency. Folks, this is dangerous. If your guy's got $1 million in the bank and can pay cash for it, then they can do a loan without financing contingency. If something's going to be suspect that they can't buy it if they don't get a loan, then you want to protect their binder again by saying, look, you need to get a financial contingency, and that's the next box down. So you can mark cash or this, but not all three. Okay, and it's either is conditional on the sale of other real estate or not. Okay, so you're going to check one of those boxes. And note, if neither box is marked, the loan approval is not conditioned upon the close of another piece of real estate. So if you miss and don't mark one, it's not going to be conditioned on another closing. And if your buyer has to sell his house to buy this one, he could get in trouble. You want that condition, okay? You want to identify it to the seller too, because that weakens his contract, okay? And you want to make sure that the seller is aware. And usually when you have that situation, the seller is going to ask you if you have it under contract. Do you have it listed for sale? If you don't have his property listed for sale and you don't have it under contract, you'll recognize this when you walk into a builder's model and try and buy a builder's model and you don't even have the house under contract. They're going to want a listing on that property before they sign off on the contract. The builder will. Okay, so it's a wonderful listing opportunity for you. You've seen that.
I'm glad you said that. I'm about to have a situation like that.
Yeah. Well, just go ahead and get it listed, and hopefully under contract, then go sit down with the builder. You know, that's the easiest way to do it. If your seller is concerned that they won't be able to buy from the builder, go and sit down with the builder, register everything, and talk to them and say, look, we're going to go list the house for sale today. I'll get it under contract in the next day or two. You go ahead and start processing paperwork, pay your binder and everything over here, and get it going that way. But you're going to hinge off of your builder rep as far as how does that work? What's the timing of it? Okay. Then the type of, any questions about that? Okay. Type of loans, FHA. Everybody understand FHA? How much does FHA finance? Hey, we've got another Sheldon Cooper over here, 96.5%, he says. That's how much they finance, 3.5% down. Awesome money. And in every one of these paragraphs, all three of these paragraphs have a lot of information in here, but it says that the property has to appraise. If the property doesn't have to appraise, what does it say? It says that, if I can find it here, the purchaser should satisfy him or herself that the price and condition of the property is acceptable. But it also says that it's the purchaser shall have the privilege and the option of proceeding with the consummation of this contract without regard to the amount of the appraised value. Okay, so it's not the seller's option. Didn't appraise for enough, I'm not selling it. It's the purchaser's option. That gives you the right to stay and buy it at that price. It gives you the right to leave. Okay. Anytime you have the right to leave a contract, what does that give you? That gives you the right to negotiate. Either you lower the price or I'm leaving. Okay. I have seen agents put in other terms and conditions that the seller agrees to reduce the purchase price to the appraised value if the appraised value is not above the current purchase price. Put it right in the other terms and conditions. That's an automatic then.
That's another line.
No, that's a line that you can add in the other terms and conditions. Other terms and conditions is one of the last paragraphs in the contract. Okay, so after you get done writing the contract, if you got anything else to say, you put it in other terms and conditions. If this is a cash offer and you still want to get an appraisal, in the other terms and conditions, you would put this contract is contingent on the property appraising at or above the sales price. If you need language for other terms and conditions, for amendments, all that kind of stuff, I'm happy to help. I can spew legalese with the best of them. Okay. If the purchase price changes, the dollar amount referenced in line 62 should be changed to reflect the new purchase price. So how would you do that? Again, you're not going to monkey with your contract. You're going to do an amendment. You're going to say the amount on line 62 is changed to the new purchase price, and the new purchase price is changed to, and you can use line numbers all the time. When you talk about the new purchase price, you can say on the purchase price on line 39 is changed to $250,000. The amount on line 63 is changed to $250,000. And that would be your amendment, because the content of the amendment says buyer and seller agree to the following. And then whatever you write in there is what they agree to. Okay, so you're not writing legalese at that point. You're writing just simple English. This line is changed to this, and this line is changed to that. They both signed. You have now amended the contract. A little trick with amendments that I use is I always use the same amendment form. I don't load 2 or 3 amendment forms into the form simplicity. I load one. Okay. Then if I have an amendment, I do that amendment and I have buyer and seller sign it, and it comes up underneath in the forms, right underneath it comes up in the files right underneath the forms in form simplicity. Okay. Then if they want to make a second amendment, I go back to my original amendment. I write the second amendment on the lower line of the original amendment. I send it back to them and have them all sign it again. Okay. So that when I'm sending it to the title company and people are trying to execute this document, they're trying to make all the terms and conditions stick. They have all the terms and conditions, and you don't have to provide them 3 or 4 sheets of amendments who may or may not be included or counted. And it could be to the detriment of either buyer or seller, and you might be at fault because you didn't provide the amendment. So if you keep it all on one amendment and keep going, and every time they add a different change, like, because you could have a price change, you could have repairs, you could fold one of the contingent periods, like the repair period. You could say on the amendment that the buyer and seller agree that we're going to give a $1,000 concession for closing costs. Not really, and you don't say anything about repairs at that point. But then the next line would say that the contingency for inspection is hereby expired. Okay, and that way that amendment's going to go to the underwriter. The underwriter's going to see it, but they're not going to see that there are repairs required that the buyer is passing on, because that could cause a lot of problems in underwriting. Don't let me get too deep in the weeds, folks. VA has the same language. It says that the buyer shall, however, have the privilege and option of proceeding with consummation if it doesn't appraise. Now, keep in mind that there is a VA addendum that goes with all VA deals that is going to state the same thing over again. So you'll have to get the standard VA addendum signed when it's a VA property. Conventional or USDA, we talked about this in class the other day. USDA is conventional financing. The only difference is that is government backed, and they will finance up to 100% of the purchase price, as long as they will finance up to 100% of the appraisal. Okay, it's available in rural areas, unincorporated areas, so you can use it in St. Johns County, Clay County, Nassau County, Baker County, all those other places. Why can't you use it in Duval County? We have a very special, there's only 2 counties in the United States that are like this. We have a consolidated, because you've been around here a long time, worked in city government. You remember when JSO was a county organization and they had a city police department. And at one point that was all folded in together. Okay. The beauty of it is we have no county taxes. We have no county government. We completely eliminated that layer. They incorporated the whole county as the city of Jacksonville. That's why the beaches and all are under the city of Jacksonville, even though they have their own mayor and all those things. That was part of getting all that to work right. But there's only 2 counties in the country like this, and it's really a privilege to have that. 1968. Okay. And again, it's built in with the appraisal clause in there. Okay, if perchance you were using other financing, seller financing, mortgage financing, you would check this box. Okay. Application, and you'll find that there are people that will do seller financing, and they'll do a 2 or 3 year balloon, and then you have to go find your own financing, you know, and it's just kind of a stopgap to get you through so you can buy the property, and then the seller's going to collect interest until you refinance. Application will be within 5 days if left blank after the acceptance of this agreement, and this is guaranteeing that they're going to go and actually apply for a mortgage. You don't do anything to this if they're paying cash. Okay. And that means that you have to provide a sufficient amount of information for them to generate a loan estimate and fees required by the buyer and the lender, and otherwise the buyer is in default. If you don't make application within that number of days, buyer's in default. What does that mean? The buyer's in default, you go to remedies in paragraph 12. Okay, that's where you look for the remedies if somebody's in default. Okay.
Jeff, is it okay just to leave that blank then? Is 5 days standard for that?
You can make it 5 days, 3 days, 2 days. If you know that he's going to, if you're to, and that's why, again, I work very closely with mortgage brokers, and most of my customers work with the same mortgage brokers that I've recommended to them. And because we do that, that mortgage broker is intimately familiar with the file and intimately familiar with me, and is keeping me apprised of what's going on. Okay. So if I know that that customer has already made application for a mortgage, which Howard would tell me, okay, then I could say within 1 day. Okay. The thing of it is, the longer the period of time that they're waiting to make application, the farther away closing is. Okay. Now, obviously, you want to give them some time to make application, because let's say, again, it's Friday, Saturday, Sunday, they can't make application. Monday, they may have to get some documentation together. So making application Tuesday would be 4 days. So 5 days is a reasonable amount of time. But if you were to put 10 days in that, seller's going to wrinkle up his nose and say, this smells bad. Okay. They're going to be curious about that. If the seller's not, the listing agent is certainly going to be. Okay. And you'll notice that the buyer is required to timely furnish all the information required by the lender, as it says right there. Otherwise, they're in default. Buyer here authorizes the lender to disclose the information regardless of status, progress, and condition of the loan to seller's attorney, brokers to this transaction, both brokers. Okay. For the terms of this contract, you are brokers. Okay. They can disclose to you, they can disclose to me, because you're part of the broker. Okay. And also they can disclose to the closing attorney, settlement agent, and provide copies of combined settlement statements for the buyer and the seller to the closing disclosures to the broker and to this transaction. Now, what that's, and you'll get closing attorneys that say, oh, you're the buyer's agent, I can't provide you the seller's closing disclosure. And you can point to this paragraph and say, yes, you can. They've authorized it because buyer and seller have signed this contract, and they've authorized for the broker to get all of that information, because the commissions may be on the seller side, but they're not shown on the buyer's document. So how can you confirm your commissions are correct if you don't get that information? Seller shall, upon reasonable notice, provide access to the property for appraisals, and if not, the loan approval period will be extended by the time access is denied. Okay? That's automatic. You don't have to write an amendment for that. You just have to document the delay. Okay? And that's usually by having an email or something. Then if it push comes to shove and somebody tries to shove you, you can say, wait a minute. It says right in there that the loan period was extended because you did not provide access for the appraiser. Okay, now you're gonna be involved in the appraisal. You want to go when the house is appraised. You want to provide the appraiser with a copy of your contract and your comps. Make sure that they get in the right place on the appraisal. Okay, so you're gonna be intimately familiar with that. They're usually gonna call you for access so that you can make an appointment with that, with the seller, should you need to. Sometimes they'll screw up and call the listing agent. When they used to call me as a listing agent, I used to tell them, oh, no, you need to call a buyer's agent. I don't want to do that. And I'd make them I'd give them the buyer's agent's number and let them call the buyer's agent. And then the buyer's agent called me back and say, well, the appraiser wants to come at 9 o'clock. Yeah, I know. That's okay. Fine. Okay. So you want to make sure that you document it. And this is all the little stuff in the contract that has big impact sometimes. Loan approval period. If the mortgage is not approved within 30 days, if left blank, after the date of acceptance of this agreement without contingencies or other required, if you get, and I used to be wrong about this, but if you get a conditional approval, okay, you don't necessarily have loan approval. Because if those conditions can't be met or are not met, then they will not approve. So what this says is without contingencies other than lender required repairs, replacements, treatments, marketable title and survey, hereafter called loan approval period, buyer may terminate this agreement in writing the seller notice within the loan approval period or deemed to have waived the financial contingency. Okay, so it says that it's the things that the seller has to do, the things that like the survey would normally be ordered by the seller. Those things are outside of loan approval. You can still go ahead, but if there are contingencies, and usually what you'll get when the first approval you'll get when it comes back from underwriting is an approval that requires the seller to do this and this and this. That's a conditional approval. Those are conditions that have to be met. Some of those conditions can be met at closing. Like he just has to sign this document. The document goes to closing, he signs it, and the condition's met. Some of those conditions have to be met before they'll let it go to closing. And so the seller and the lender are going to scurry around and get all those things done. When they get a conditional approval, as it says in the document, the loan officer has the right to provide you with that information so you can help with conditions if you need to move it along. Okay.
I had a seller or listing agent once previously try to make the loan approval period within 10 days.
Yep.
What is the reasoning behind that?
He wants to get closed faster.
Just
But it sounds like built-in failure though. What lender's going to loan you money in 10 days?
right.
You know, unless you've got 20 days of approval behind you when you sign the contract, that's going to be a kind of a hill too far.
Yeah.
So you're setting it up to fail. Now I will tell you this, and I've told y'all in class that you want to have a gap between the contingency for financing and the closing date. You want to make sure that everything is done and loan is approved, and then there's a waiting period to go to closing. Why do you want that waiting period? It's going to give the seller time to do any necessary repairs that haven't been completed. It's going to give everybody a chance to get settled on this and have their money in the right place and all that kind of stuff. And it's going to prevent the buyer from walking up to the closing table and get pissed off at something and walk away and take his binder money with him. Okay. It's going to cost him at that point if he walks away because he doesn't have any contingencies left. The contingency for financing is the last one. So in most cases, I would make the loan approval period 25 days or 30 days, unless they're using Navy Federal. And if they're using Navy Federal, you make it 120 days and you hope for the best. Okay. That's a joke, folks. That's a joke. Don't tell Navy Federal I said that. Okay, but it's 30 days if left blank, right? Okay. So it says buyer may terminate this agreement by written notice and during the loan approval period, or it's deemed to have been waived the financial contingency. If the buyer does not terminate this agreement prior to the end of the loan approval period, neither the buyer nor seller shall have the right to terminate this agreement under this paragraph. The binder deposit shall not be refundable because of the buyer's failure to obtain financing, and this agreement shall continue through the date of closing. Okay, then if they don't close, Mr. Seller is going to be standing there with his hand out. That's my money. This is where you get into binder dispute, because the buyer is going to say, well, I couldn't get financing, but you didn't give a notice to them in writing, as it says in this paragraph. These are the things you have to do. Now, where does that put you as an agent? You have to keep track of all these dates and times and everything, and make sure that people are moving right along. You have to sometimes push the lender. You have to do a whole bunch of stuff to make sure that your dates are all met. You have to know that those dates are in there. So reading the contract really does make sense, because it puts responsibilities on you as the agent to make sure that all this stuff is happening. Now, we finished page 2 in 45 minutes. This is going to be good. We're going to come back to this, I think. Okay, the next section is very important. Maintenance, inspection, and repair. Seller will maintain the property in condition until closing, except for normal wear and tear and agreed upon replacements, repairments, treatments. Buyer elects not to have inspections or investigations performed, or fails to make a timely request for them, then the property is as is. Okay. And as of the date of this, the acceptance of this agreement, buyer will be responsible for repairs of all damages to the property resulting from inspections and investigations. I had a customer that flooded the master bedroom. He put a plug in the tub, turned on the water to fill up the tub, walked away, came back 25 minutes later, and the emergency drain didn't work. And it flooded the bedroom and took up all the flooring. They had to buy the house with no floors, because they are responsible for repairing anything as a result of their inspections, and that was damage as a result of an inspection. Access and utilities. And again, there's something else here that you got to see. Seller will make the property available for inspections, including but not limited to, they have to have the electric on, the fuel, the gas, the water, and active at the date of acceptance of this agreement through the date of closing. That means they can't turn stuff off 3 days before closing, because you're going to do a walkthrough the last day. It has to be on to the date of closing. If not, the time for inspections and investigations will be extended by the time access was denied. So if they don't have the power on and you're trying to do inspections and 10 days later they still don't have the power on, guess what? You got 10 free days. Okay. You don't have to write an amendment for it. It's right in the contract. Again, you have to document the power was not on. Okay. Within 10 days, and this is your inspection period. If you have a problem with a property and maybe it has a sinkhole or something like that, you might want a longer inspection period, huh? You might want a 45-day inspection period. You know, if you have to get geo people out there to figure out if you can fill in the hole and whatever, you know. So the inspection period normally is 10 days. In this hot market, it's got to be 10 days, you know, and that means everybody's busy. So I certainly hope Berna doesn't want in on this class. She's ringing my phone. Let's see. I don't have anybody waiting. Okay, so the buyer may, but is not required to, have the property inspected and investigated, appropriate licensed inspectors and persons who hold a Florida license to build, repair, or maintain the items inspected. Okay, so if you're having somebody check out the air conditioner, it's not going to be your brother-in-law unless he's a licensed air conditioning mechanic, right? Okay. And in condos, sometimes rather than inspect the property, you can go around and you can, or the owner can go, the buyer can go around and he can check all the appliances, make sure everything seems to be in working order. And the only other thing there is in a condo, because you don't own the walls, you only own the paint, you own the carpet. So it's basically what you can see. Okay. So the buyer can check out the appliances, make sure all the burners come on and you know, look at the pipes under the sink and make sure that there's no leaks and whatever. Or he can pay for a home inspection, you know, which I would recommend. But if he doesn't want to pay for a home inspection, the one thing that you may want to get checked out is the air conditioner. So you pay Snyderman or somebody a $100 bill to come out and check the air conditioner. It's cheaper than an inspection, but on a condo, that might be all you need because you're not responsible for the roof, the framing, the WDO. You're not responsible for any of that. That doesn't belong to you when you buy a condo. Just food for thought. Okay. Okay, so then it talks about testing all of the things that they're going to test, inspecting for active infestation of termites or wood destroying organisms, and determine if the property has a CDD, okay, which would require a CDD disclosure. If the buyer determines that the buyer's, and this is the most important line in the contract, if the buyer determines if the buyer's sole and absolute discretion, that's the property is not acceptable to the buyer for what? Any reason. For no, that you could substitute for no reason. Okay? Because he doesn't have to have a reason. He can walk onto the property, say the grass is too green, I'm not buying it. Must be fake grass, so I'm not buying it. It's too green. Okay? That tree is too close to the house. I'm not buying it. That house next door is too close to this house. I'm not buying it. But he doesn't, in fact, have to have an inspection. He doesn't have to have a WDO report. He can do it simply at his sole discretion. Okay. So for the first 10 days, the buyer gets a free look, no harm, no foul, gets his money back, walks away. Okay. You still have to do a cancellation. You have to put on the cancellation that the buyer's getting his money back and everybody has to sign it because the only way that binder is leaving my office is if everybody signs or I get a EDO from FREC, which ain't going to be now. It's going to be 2 months from now. Okay. All right. So the buyer has these options. He may terminate the agreement, delivering written notice of the termination to the seller together with a copy of all written reports, if any, inspections, investigations, if such reports are requested by seller. Okay. If you don't have any, nothing to give. If you had the AC guy come and he inspected the AC and he says it's going to fail and he gave it to you in verbally and he gave you a bill, the only thing you'd have to turn over to them is the bill from the AC guy. Okay. Now, if you do have reports, you turn them over. Obviously, that's going to be an aid to the seller because they're going to be able to go and repair things based on what that inspection report says, if that's why you're leaving. Okay, and then the option B is to submit the buyer's written request to the seller for repairs, replacements, treatments, together with copies of the written reports. If any of the inspections, investigations, buyers and sellers have 7 days from the seller's receipt of such request in which to enter into a written agreement for repairs, treatments. And that means that the seller has up to 7 days after the receipt of the request, not 7 days after the 10-day period. Okay. So if you've submitted repairs to the seller on, let's say you got the inspection day 1, day 2, you submitted your repair request to the seller. Day 9, the seller says, I agree to all those repairs. Can the buyer still get out of the contract?
Yeah, they have 10 days.
There's 1 day left. Yes, you can. If you go through all that process, day 9, you present your repair request to the seller and the seller takes their 7 days. And they get to the end of that and they say, no, can the buyer get out of the contract? Yes, they can. Read on, Grasshopper.
Quick question, Jeff.
Yeah.
Is it realistic to get inspections with a 1 day notice?
No. Now, most inspectors right now are booked up. You'll be lucky to find one that you can get on the 5th or 6th day. And usually there's a weekend involved. So you end up getting your inspection on 7 days, getting it back on 8 days. And you've got to get, you've got 10 days to get it to the seller. So it's usually a time crunch.
So that 10 days, realistically, the buyer is depending on their own research to really get out of it.
No, you're going to get the inspection done. But I guess what I'm saying is it's going to behoove you to have the buyer apprised. And what I do with a buyer is I provide them with three different choices for a home inspector, or they can choose their own. They're not obligated to any of them. That way it's their choice, not yours. So they don't feel like they're getting railroaded into a home inspector that's not going to give them a good job. Okay. And then when all that's done, you know, you're going to have to muscle that thing along and make sure that because the seller's not going to write the repair agreement. You are, as an agent, based on what the seller tells you they want done. Okay, so you're gonna have to pony up, get that done, and get it over to the seller in a timely fashion. Okay, and emails are the way to do that, because the email is going to document with a timestamp when you send it, and they will stand up in court. So that's the way you want to do it. But let me go back. Did that answer your question, Scott?
Yes.
Okay, so let me go back. Okay, within 7 days, the buyer may terminate this agreement by giving written notice of the termination to the seller within 3 days after the 7 days. Okay, if buyer and seller have not entered into a written agreement after the 7 days. Okay, so the answer is yes, they can get out, and they actually have another 10 days to get out. You know, because let's say you handed it in on the 9th day, then they have 7 days. Then they have another 3 days. So you actually have 19 days total from the time of the contract, and the buyer can still exit because the seller won't repair.
Have any rights to back out?
Nope,
Okay.
nope. And you'll find that in the NEFAR contract, the seller never does.
Yeah.
All he can do is piss the buyer off bad enough that the buyer leaves. Okay, and that's what they'll do.
That's what my dad's doing right now.
Yeah, you just have to piss off the buyer bad enough that the buyer leaves. Okay, and you're going to give him his money back too, by the way. So the longer it takes, and I had a situation where seller signed a contract and had remorse. They weren't getting as much money as they thought, and they wanted to kick the buyer out. Buyer did the inspections. We asked for repair. The seller said no repairs, and I'm canceling the contract. He thought that he had the right to renegotiate when he refused to do the repairs. The buyer says, no, I'm gonna buy it anyway. Don't need any repairs, because it was one door down from his mother's house. Okay, and that's where he wanted to be. So location was the key. Okay, so they decided they're gonna buy it anyway. And then the seller says, no, we're not gonna sell it to you. We're gonna put it back on the market. And so I called the broker on the other side and I said, you know how this ends. And he says, yeah, I know how it ends. So he went and talked to the guy and he said, you know, this broker over here, he's got big lawyers. And if you back out of this contract, guess what? You're going to have to pay him and you're going to have to pay me because we've earned our money. Then you're going to have to sell it again. So you're going to get even less money. So it's my considered advice to you, Mr. Seller, that you sell because you don't have any right to back out.
Yeah.
Okay. If this agreement is terminated provided by this paragraph, buyer and seller shall be released from all other obligations of the agreement except otherwise provided in paragraph 3. What's provided in paragraph 3? What are they talking about? Anybody remember? That the buyer has to repair anything as a result of an inspection. That's in paragraph 3. Okay. Prior to the binder deposits being delivered to the buyer shall provide the seller with paid receipts for all investigations and inspections, if any. Why is this? Doesn't want the inspector coming back filing a lien against the property that he didn't buy because he inspected that property, and then the seller would end up having to clear it up. So they're trying to prevent injury from a walkaway buyer. Okay. So, and I would suggest that if you're in that situation and you're writing the cancellation, that you would require those receipts from the buyer with the cancellation in order for the seller to sign the cancellation, give the buyer's money back. Otherwise, it's in limbo. I want the money back. I need those receipts. Okay. Buyer shall be responsible for prompt payment of all buyers' inspections and investigations, agreed to indemnify and hold the seller harmless from all losses, damage claims, suits, and costs which may arise out of the contract agreement or injury to any person or property as a result of any activities of the buyer or the buyer's agents, representatives relating to inspections and investigations, except for any loss, damage claims, or suits or costs arising out of pre-existing conditions of the property or out of the seller's negligence, willful acts or omissions. So if there's a hole in the floor and the inspector falls in through the carpet and through the hole in the floor, who's liable?
The
Seller is still liable. That liability does not go away just because it's the act of inspection, because that could be considered seller's negligence. He threw the carpet over the hole to conceal it. Any questions about page 3? Is this doing any good? All right. We got 16 people out there and 4 of y'all in here. That's 20 people doing this. Okay. Seller shall have agreed to repairs, replacement treatments completed approximately by appropriately licensed persons within 10 days after entering into the written agreement for such buyer and receipt of the seller of receipt by the seller of written notice that the buyer's loan approval, if applicable. Okay, so that means if it's not a cash deal and there has to be a loan approval, the seller does not have to do any repairs until the loan is approved. And you have to give him written notice of the loan approval. Okay, so he's going to sit there and he's going to wait because he doesn't want to spend money on your repairs if he's got another buyer coming in and they're going to want different repairs. Okay, or he may be able to not negotiate such a bad deal with another buyer. You were tough. Okay, so so within 10 days after the loan approval, he will have those repairs done. This is why you got to have some time after loan approval, at least 10 days, because it's written right in the contract. If you don't have those 10 days, the seller's responsible for repairing that after you're supposed to go to closing. That won't work, will it? Yeah, so you want to keep those dates in mind. Buyer may, within 3 days after receipt of seller's written notice and delivery of such receipts, re-inspect the property solely to verify the seller has completed the agreed upon repairs. No other repair, replacement, treatment issues may be raised as a result of this re-inspection. So you can't go in and find fault with something else. I had a WDO inspector do that to me once. He came back in and he says, "Oh, well, you fixed all this, but then there's this." And I was the seller of the property. I said, "You can't do that." It says so right here in the contract. Walkthroughs. Prior to closing, buyer may walk through the property solely to verify that the seller has maintained the property and they're getting all the stuff that's in there. Don't ever skip a walkthrough. Always insist that you go on a walkthrough and as close to closing as possible. Usually the morning of, you're going to do the walkthrough. I went and I was actually had the listing of a property, and the property had conveyed all of the appliances to the buyer in the contract. And for some reason, unbeknown to me, I went to the property and checked to make sure it was cleaned out and everything was ready to go. The buyer was going to do their walkthrough at 1 o'clock. When I got there at 9:30 in the morning, all the appliances were missing. The seller had loaded them up and took them all with him. Called him up, said, "Did you take all the appliances?" He said, "Yes." I said, "You know, the contract had all those conveying to the buyer. You got to put them back." And he says, "Oh, no." So I had to go to my house, get my handy dandy 14-foot enclosed trailer, go to his new house, pick up all the appliances and roll them back into his old house before 1 o'clock when the buyer came to do the walkthrough. Now, if I hadn't gone to look and the buyer showed up, what would have happened to that closing? Yeah. Well, I do nice things for my customers sometimes. Anyway, all's well that ends well, but never skip a walkthrough. And make sure when you go to the walkthrough, you may want to take a copy of the contract with you to make sure you know what's conveyed. When you see holes in the wall where things are missing, and you can say, because what does the contract say? Well, we'll get to that. Buyer's responsibility walkthrough. Okay, so
I have a question on the walkthrough.
Yeah.
So how early can that happen, the walkthrough?
Well, you could do it the day before. I wouldn't do it too early though, because somebody else has keys to that property and things could change. So you want to get, and a lot of times what I will do when I'm there doing walkthrough, I will call the listing agent, or we'll have prearranged with the listing agent so that when I leave, I bring the keys. I leave their lockbox. I'm not gonna take their lockbox off, but I bring the keys. Okay, that way nobody has access to the property, by accessing the lockbox until we get it closed, and then the buyer can go back.
The standard is the same day or the day before?
My standard is if you're closing at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, you're gonna do it the same day. If you're closing at 9 o'clock in the morning, you may do it the night before. Okay, but if you can remove access to the property by taking the keys and you have that agreement with the seller, I would do that. Okay, and the lights have to be on. Okay, they're not, you can't do a walkthrough in a dark house. Okay, the lights have to be on. If the lights aren't on, you've got an automatic extension. Buyer's responsibility: repairs, replacements, treatments of the property after the date of closing or the buyer's possession, whichever occurs first, will be the buyer's responsibility unless otherwise agreed in writing. What this says is if you get an early occupancy, let's say you write an early occupancy agreement and the buyer moves in 10 days prior to closing with the agreement that they're going to have their insurance in place and all that, they take that property as is. Once they move in, if on day 7 of their occupancy, their early occupancy, the stove quits, who fixes the stove? The buyer. Why does it say so? It says in paragraph 3B that the buyer is responsible for everything once they take possession of the property. That is to prevent this last minute, oh, the air conditioner crapped out, you got to buy me a new air conditioner now. It's not a tenancy, and the tenancy is not created. Okay, in my pre-occupancy agreement, it specifically says a tenancy is not created. You simply have possession of the property. And all those things are reiterated in.
Kind of agreement that
Yes, yes,
someone
it's,
can have and say, I forgot to fix this.
yes,
There's something-
yes, you can do that. And usually that comes up at closing. And what you will do is, like you do the walkthrough, and then you notice the air conditioner is still in pieces in the yard. Okay, because they didn't get to it. Okay, so you can go to closing and you can make an agreement at the closing table. Okay, Mr. Seller, I know that you overlooked this. You didn't go back and look at the property, but the air conditioner not put together. What are you going to do about that? Okay, we'll get it fixed. Okay, then I want $5,000 of your proceeds to go into escrow with the title company, and we will release that escrow as soon as you get the air conditioner fixed. Is that okay? Okay, the title companies have that agreement. They'll write it up. Boom, there you go. And they'll hold the $5,000 until everybody signs off that money's released. Okay, so if the air conditioner's up and running and it's all put back together, sign and release, and it goes. And that'll happen too. You can do that with a roof. Because a lot of times they'll get into this, oh, we want 50% of the roof and blah, blah, blah. And so you have the roof put on after closing, but they'll have the seller's portion of the payment escrowed at closing out of his proceeds. And then the buyer who owns the property will be responsible for paying the roofer. And then when all that's settled, those funds will either go to the buyer or they'll go back to the seller once everybody signs a release. That's a last ditch though.
Yes.
That gets rather dicey when you get to that point and you're doing those things. And we used to see a lot more of that back in the day when there was a lot more inventory. Okay, title evidence. Any questions about buyer's responsibility? Any questions about paragraph 3? Okay, title evidence, at least blank days before closing, 10 days if left blank. The party may pay, the party paying for the owner's title shall cause the title agent to issue a title insurance commitment. Okay, and you'll see that Danielle asks for it. Okay, it's simply a letter from the title company saying that this property is insurable and we are going to insure it. Okay, that's a title insurance commitment. Now, it's however many days, and 10 days is plenty of time, 10 days prior to closing, because that's 20 days into the contract. And usually they'll produce it a lot sooner. It has to be ordered by the lender. So the lender has to know who the title company is so that they can order the title insurance commitment. Okay. So when you're handing out details at the beginning of this contract, the first thing that you do after you get it under contract, you send the contract to Danielle. You send to the listing agent the buyer's lender information, you send to the lender, the title company's information. You make sure that everybody is appropriately cross-referenced. You do not send your buyer's contact information to the seller or the seller's attorney, or we can send it to the closing agent, but you don't send it to the seller or the seller's agent. Okay. You don't want ex parte communications going around behind your back. You want to be involved in all of the transactions so you know what's going on, or you could get stabbed in the back. Okay, not that it's going to cost you money because you're still going to get paid, but you're going to look unprofessional because there's going to be stuff going on behind your back, you know, and you don't want the seller and the buyer to start negotiating stuff behind a realtor's back, because then you're not in the know. So I keep those two parties completely separated, and I will write two emails, one to the buyer, the buyer's lender, and the title company, making sure that they all have their contact information, one to the seller's agent and the title company, making sure that they have that, and the lender, making sure that they have that information, because the seller's agent is entitled to know who their lender is and how to get in touch with them, because they may have a question. And so, but I make sure that the buyer's information and the seller's agent's information are not included in the same email. It may be the same email, but I anesthetize it. Okay. And I don't use blind copies in that. I use separate. Because in a blind copy, they can't see the lender can't see the title company or anybody. Can't see anybody. Okay. Title insurance commitment for mortgage insurance policy, any amount of the buyer's loans. If the buyer is financing the purchase, any expense for curing title defects, such as but not limited to legal fees, discharge of liens, and recording fees, will be paid by the seller. Okay, so any title defects have to be cured by the seller. What's the seller selling? He's selling the right to own. He's selling the right to possess that property. Okay, it's evidenced by the title insurance. It's evidenced by the deed and all those things. So he's selling all that he has. Okay, so he has to make sure that it's clear of all defects. Otherwise, he's selling less than they bargained for. Survey map. They just recently started calling it a survey map. You know, I guess somebody sued and said, "Oh, well, it just said survey. It didn't say we had to do a map." So now it says survey map. And again, does everybody know why we do a survey?
So, you know, like property lines, make sure everything's on the actual property.
No, that's partly true. It supports the title policy. Okay. When you have a survey and it has the lines drawn around the property, and these are the property lines, what happens if the surveyor shows the corner of the house next door across that property line? Now you have an encroachment. The title company is required to defend against all encroachments. Okay, the overhang on this house is hanging over the property line. That's an encroachment. The guy built his fence on our property, 3 feet into our property. That's an encroachment. Okay, now if you catch it before the closing, it is a title defect and the seller is responsible to cure it. If you didn't have a survey, you get a conditional title policy. Conditional title policy says, except for any encroachments that would be seen on the survey, we will warrant title. So they're warranting against errors and assigns way back. But if that driveway is on your property or something like that, they're not going to protect you. Now, if you provide a survey and all's well with the survey, and nothing has changed in the survey from the current state, and then it's determined that there is an encroachment, okay, then the title company is going to defend you, and they're likely to subrogate against the surveyor because he had to make a mistake. Okay, that kind of thing. But you want an unconditional title policy. You want a title policy that warrants everything. That's why we do a survey. Okay. And as long as, and they'll accept a survey up to usually 10 years old. as long as nothing's changed. If they've built decks on the back or they've put up a fence that wasn't there, all those kinds of things, then it would do well to do a survey. They're not that expensive. They're about $300, $350. Okay, and they can save you a world of hurt. I had a property and the customer's still with me. Matter of fact, we're closing pretty soon. Matter of fact, I just moved them into an apartment because they sold their other house. But they bought a property and the fence in the backyard was 20 feet over into the JEA easement for power lines behind their house. And they thought it was their yard and they were going to put in a pool. Okay. We had done a survey and the survey was presented to them at the title company. And they said, here's the back line of your property. And of course, the fence was shown way out here, but here's the property line. Okay. It's the only thing that saved them from suing my butt off. Okay. Because they did have a survey. All right. And because they had always intended to put in a pool. One of the reasons they sold that house and are moving to their new one. Okay. So that's what a survey is for. It is to protect and defend against encroachments. Sorry for all that windage. Now you can select a new stake survey or a copy of a previously made survey. And this is very well written because if that survey is insufficient to the title company and a new stake survey is required, the seller, it will be at the seller's expense unless otherwise marked in paragraph 7A. What's 7A? That's where the buyer's costs are enumerated. If you say the buyer's going to pay for any survey, then that would come into play, even though you marked a previously one. If it wasn't acceptable, then they'd have to do one, buyer would pay for it. Normally, if you didn't mark either survey, it says here the seller would be responsible for paying for it. If a flood elevation certificate is required, the buyer shall pay for it. Okay. If you are in a flood zone, flood elevation certificate is going to be required by the lender. Lender's underwriting is going to require it, and they're going to require you to have flood insurance. Flood insurance is always a good idea because if you're not in a flood zone, it's $457. And I'm not in a flood zone, but I have a pond behind my house. And in one of those hurricane episodes, storm drains in the cul-de-sac where I was started clogging up with palm fronds and stuff. And the cul-de-sac started to fill up like a lake. And it was about 3 foot deep in the middle of the cul-de-sac, and it was halfway up my driveway, which means it was less than a foot from coming into my house. Okay. And so I've always had flood insurance on this particular property because I had the pond behind it more than anything. And it's for the catastrophic stuff, but flood insurance is never a bad idea. And it's not expensive if you're not in a flood zone. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And like right behind her house goes down and then there's swamp. And there's no telling how much water will back up in that swamp in a big rain. Okay. Title evidence and survey map is specified below. Show the seller is vested marketable title, including legal access and transmission will be closed in the deed, and a closing paper is delivered to, and you've got to mark one of these, mark only one of these. Okay, so 15 days after the loan approval period, you can mark that, or you could make it another time period. Okay, specific date is usually pretty cool because it puts a deadlock on the end of this contract and says it's going to be done by April 15th. Okay. So
Jeff, I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
If like on mine, it's when they sent it back, they said on or before May 25th. Do I put on or before, or how would I do that?
Yeah, you could do that. You could put it on or before May 25th. That means you can close earlier, but you can't close late.
Okay.
Keeping in mind, if you've done everything and you're ready to go and you're short one little item, and the title company tells you on the 23rd of May, we're not going to be able to close on the 25th. We're going to have to do it on the 26th, or the lender tells you, and this contract has an automatic extension if If the closing disclosure is not issued in time, and so the title company can't close until the closing disclosure is seasoned, it has to be like 72 hours or something like that. Okay, if that happens, then this contract has an automatic extension built into it, that you get the extra time for that. You get up to 10 days, I think, for the closing disclosure to season. We'll get there. But you can use a specific date, or you can do 45 days after the acceptance of the agreement, which that's going to be a specific date as well, because the acceptance of the agreement is specific. So either one of those is okay. I use the 15 days after loan approval period sometimes, but I like to use a specific date. It just takes all the guesswork out of it. And a lot of times people aren't counting on their hands and feet, and you end up getting it done a little sooner than you could have because you used a specific date and they're not saying it's maybe only 12 days, not 15. So
Do you include like time for holidays, like around like Thanksgiving and Christmas? Would you add in like an extra week?
you maybe could, okay, just because. And another thing that you'll get too is the last day of the month. Who's busy the last day of the month? Everybody. Good answer. Everybody's busy last day of the month. So if you're closing on the 31st, be advised the title company is going to be all booked up. The lender is going to be trying to get 19 files out the door that day. And sometimes you're better off to say the 28th or the 3rd or the 4th. I hate it when you say the 3rd or the 4th. Why didn't you get it done this month? You know, I want it sooner, not later. Okay, but go for another day other than the 31st, if at all possible, because they invariably they're slammed. Okay, unless extended by other conditions in this agreement, and that's where those 10 days and things come in. Marketable title means title with a Florida insurer will be marketable at its regular rates and subject only to matters that are cured at closing. Okay. Such usual exceptions such as survey map, current taxes, zoning ordinances, covenants, restrictions, easements of record, which are not do not adversely affect marketable title. Now there's a 30-foot easement alongside of my pond for the JEA sewer line that runs down through there. Okay. And that's not something that would prevent them from making my title marketable. I bought it that way. Seller will not take or allow any action to be taken that alters or changes the status of the title to the property. Okay. So he's not going to sell off another piece to somebody else in the midst of all that's going on. Once you have it under contract, that property is nailed down. If closing does not occur by the date of closing, according to CFPB delivered requirements, and this is what I was just telling you, the date of closing will be extended by a period necessary for the not to exceed 10 days. If it's extreme weather, act of God, government shutdown, COVID, government shutdown, hurricane, act of God, okay. Force majeure, war, or terrorism prevents any obligation under this agreement from being originally performed. The unavailability of insurance because there's a named storm in the box. You know, the box around Florida, there's a named storm in the box. What can't they do? They can't issue insurance. So you can't buy the house because you can't get insurance. So a named storm in the box, you automatically get an extension. But in no event more than 5 days after the restoration of services essential to the closing process. That means once the storm's moved out of the box, you got 5 days to finish. Okay. If force majeure prevents performance of the obligation under this agreement for more than 30 days beyond closing date. Okay. Now that could be COVID could have easily said you can't close for 30 days or more. May terminate this agreement by delivering written notice to the other party. Either party, that's the only time the seller can terminate. Okay. And if the title evidence or survey map says it's unmarketable, or if the property is not in compliance with government regulations permitting condominium, the owner's fees, association rules and regulations, buyer or closing attorney agent after 5 days from the receipt of the title commitment, survey map, or written evidence of the association permit will notify the seller in writing of such defect. Seller agrees to use reasonable diligence to cure all defects at the seller's expense, even if not yet a monetary obligation, and will have 30 days to do so, in which event the transaction will close 10 days after delivery. The buyer of the evidence that such defects have been cured. Okay. Seller agrees to pay for the discharge of all due diligent taxes, liens, and monetary encumbrances unless otherwise agreed to in writing. If seller is unable to convey marketable title or cure the association permitting regulatory, buyer will have the right to either terminate this agreement or accept the property as the seller has the ability to convey it, close the transaction in terms stated herein. Which election must be exercised within 10 days of the buyer's receipt of the seller's written notice of the seller's inability to cure. Okay, all that says is what it says. Okay, it does say in there, and this has to do with municipal lien search. It says in here that the seller has the obligation to cure all municipal liens. Okay. Now, it also says in here, and you'll see it later on, that the seller affirms that there are no municipal liens. Okay. So the combination of those two paragraphs would mean that the seller's on the hook for any undetermined municipal liens at the end after it closes. Okay. Now, I want to say something about municipal lien searches. They were invented by the title company to get extra money. They really don't have a lot of value. They're absolutely worthless on a condo. Okay. If you're a listing agent and the buyer wants a municipal lien search, you can tell the buyer, hey, look, we're happy for you to do a municipal lien search. You pay for it. We're not paying for it. It's not a seller's obligation to go search for something that's not there. The seller's already affirming in the contract that there are no municipal liens, or that he will cure them after the contract, before closing. Now, what happens if you get out the other side of closing and a municipal lien is discovered? You could go back to the seller and say, look, you didn't disclose this. You said there weren't any liens. You owe us. Contractually, he still owes you. Okay. So what's the value of a municipal lien search is dubious, except to say that it's clear. But if a buyer wants one, you just tell them, hey, just tell them, go ahead and do one. You can do it and you pay for it. Now, if the property has been distressed, if it has been a foreclosure, chances are there could be a municipal lien against it for lawn mowing, for noxious weeds or something like that. I had one that was $10,000. It was $275 a day for a swimming pool. Okay, because the swimming pool wasn't clean. Because a dead body could float under the swimming pool and never be found. So swimming pools have to be clean. It's a municipal ordinance. And if you don't clean your swimming pool, they can assess a $275 a day fine until you. This one went up to $10,000. It was on a short sale. The owner was no longer there. And I finally made an agreement with the short sale lender. I said, look, if I can get this municipal lien waived, you're going to pay me the 6% that you took away from me and only pay me 5% on this deal. And he says, yes. And we had an agreement and it was in writing. And so I went to the building official. I said, look, selling this property. The swimming pool is now clean. You can go inspect it. Can we get rid of this municipal lien? And he said, sure. Wrote it off. The way it went, I got my 6%. Those were the days. Okay. Did I go through this paragraph? I did. I got all the way to buyer will pay. Any questions about paragraph 6? It is important to read the contract and read it over and over again. I read the contract in full before I came to teach this class. I did, because I wanted to make sure there would be hell to pay, right? So closing, buyer will pay. Okay, everything in this column relates to the buyer's lender. Almost everything in this column and the inspection. So it's normal and customary for you to check everything in this column unless there's no other. Okay. One very important, the broker transaction fee is $2.99. You always check that. Okay. You have to have the right to charge that. You get the right to charge that in a buyer broker agreement where it says $2.99. I also, if you want to use a disclosure, you can use a disclosure that has bold and radon gas and all this stuff. And in the middle of the disclosure, you can put buyer agrees to pay the $2.99 broker fee at closing, and that will take care of it. There's some writing, so you should have a writing. You should disclose to your buyer, get them at some point to agree to pay that. It will be charged. Okay. And most of these things, VA funding fee, mortgage, you may not have these, but if you do have them, they need to be checked off. It doesn't need to be ambiguous about who's paying for these things. And then these are actually sellers things. And like I said, the municipal lien search, you know what I think of that. And mortgage transfer and assumption fees, where you're not transferring a mortgage or assumption usually, so you probably wouldn't use that. All other charges required by the lender in connection with the buyer's loan unless prohibited by law or regulation, together with lenders related settlement service fees, charges of processing and closing and post-close on buyer's loans. So that means the buyer's going to pay all that. They're going to pay all the condominium homeowners association application transfer fees and the cost of completion. And they're going to pay any capital contributions. What is a capital contribution? A friend of mine bought a condo at the beach, and the condo docs, there were 5 units. That was the whole condo association, just those 5 units. And the condo docs required him to pay a $2,500 assessment into the condo association for taking ownership of the new unit. That is a, what do they call it there? That is a capital contribution. Prepaids. You're going to pay all your insurance, wind insurance, taxes, interest, mortgage insurance, premiums if required by the lender. Okay, so if the lender says that you're going to escrow 3 months of taxes, that's what it's talking about there. You agree to pay that. Okay, seller will pay. Most of these things here have to deliver with clear title, have to do with delivering clear title. That's what a seller will pay. Deed, owner's title policy, title insurance, closing attorneys, survey map, satisfaction of mortgage, and seller's courier fees. Then if you want, if you're representing the buyer, it's a distressed property, you may want him to pay for the municipal lien search. But again, don't be surprised if it comes back at you, because there's a lot of agents like me out there. A lot of times you'll ask for a 1-year home warranty. Not so good right now because it's going to be a less effective offer than if you didn't ask for a seller to pay for that. $500 out of his pocket. So keep that in mind when you're in multiple offers and all that kind of stuff. If you're asking for a home warranty, it could be a negative.
Brian, how much do you say that usually is?
Usually around $500.
Oh,
Or you can say that the seller pays for up to not to exceed $500. And then if it's $560, the buyer pays $60. Okay. Real estate commission, brokerage fees, brokerage transaction fee pursuant to the listing agreement. Okay, that's what the seller's paying. Okay.
Why would the seller pay for the appraisal?
Because it's part of, that's an option.
Okay,
And usually they won't.
okay, yeah.
Usually they won't.
That's what I thought.
Yeah. Okay, so you're going to pay the real estate commission, brokerage fees, condominium homeowners association estoppel fees. The estoppel fee is $350 because that's the maximum the state said they can charge, and that's what everybody charges now. Used to be cheaper, but since the state said you could charge this much, everybody went for it. And it basically says that the homeowners association, this much is owed to the homeowners association. This is how much is paid up. And that's what they use to prorate the homeowners association dues when you buy a house in an association or a condo. All other charges required by the lender in connection with the buyer's loan, which the buyer is prohibited by paying by law or regulation. And that could be a local regulation, or it could be like a VA requirement that the buyer can't pay. Used to be that the buyer couldn't pay for the WDO. The VA has since rescinded that obligation, so the buyer can now pay for a WDO. That language survives. If the seller agrees to pay an amount towards buyer's closing costs, which shall include buyer's prepaids, seller shall be obligated to pay only those closing costs that are listed in 7A, B, C, and D above. This is where you lose benefit. Let's say you negotiate $10,000 and you couch it as buyer's closing cost concession. And you would do that right here. Seller agrees to pay, under other, seller agrees to pay $10,000 towards allowable closing costs. Okay. Then let's say when you total up everything that's in here and here and here and here, it's only $7,500. What happens to the other $2,500?
Still goes to the buyers.
No, Mr. Seller sticks that right back in his pocket. Okay, because you lose that benefit. So don't overestimate your closing costs. If you were negotiating $10,000 in repairs and the seller says, no, just let me give you $10,000. We'll give it to you as closing costs. Beware, because if it exceeds those closing costs under the terms of this contract, you would lose any additional benefit. You have to be careful of that. Okay. So make sure that you're getting all the benefit. Make sure that you've got enough prepaids and that kind of stuff to be included in all of that. And if not, before you go to closing, you write an amendment and you assign that benefit to something else. Like the seller agrees to pay $2,500 towards a new refrigerator or something, so that you can recoup that benefit if you can negotiate it. Because I've gone to the closing table and the buyer's a little upset because some of that money didn't get spent. So they were out that benefit that they negotiated. And sometimes lenders will overestimate what the buyer needs to close, and he didn't need that much. That happens in that case too. Okay, so seller will pay, and real estate commission and estoppel, and all other charges required by the lender, the buyer can't pay. If seller agrees to pay towards buyer's closing costs, we covered that. All mortgage payments, condominium, homeowners association, assessments, CDD, and government assessed fees due and payable shall be paid at the seller's expense at the time of closing. Property assessed clean energy financing. This was to do things like solar panels on your house. You did clean energy financing. That has to be resolved. Just be aware that that's there. You can read it at your leisure. Public body special assessments. Public body special assessments are not condo fees, and they're not CDD fees. Public body special assessments are things like they came by and they repaved the road in front of your house and they charged everybody on that street $750 as a public body special assessment to repave the road. Okay. Now, that's the only thing that these two boxes are used for. Okay. And a lot of times people don't know what they're for. Okay. But it says public body does not include condominium, homeowners association, or CDD. If the public body special assessment may be paid in installments, mark $1. Either the buyer is going to pay the installments due after closing, which you don't want, or the seller has to pay it all in full. That's what you want. Okay. So generally, if you're representing a buyer, because most of the time when you're writing a contract, when you represent the buyer, you're receiving a contract when you represent the seller. So most of the time, it's going to come in with the seller will pay all. If neither box is marked, seller shall pay such assessments in full or at the time of closing. Prior to or at the time of closing. So you get this automatically if they don't mark either. 8H, what is 8H? That's this one. shall not apply to liens imposed by community development districts created by Florida Statute 190. That's a specific thing. And special benefit tax assessments imposed by community development districts. So it does not include CDDs. Shall be treated as ad valorem taxes and prorated. Then it talks about proration. Does everybody understand proration? They're prorated as of the day of closing. What does the day of, who does the day of closing belong to, the buyer or the seller? Everybody knows that, it belongs to the buyer. So the seller pays all things prorated up to the day before closing. The day of closing belongs to the buyer. Now, this one's dicey. Defaults. Are we still good? Everybody good? I lost a couple of people. Defaults. Okay. If buyer defaults under this agreement include failure to pay all binder deposits, this is the one where they get you on a binder deposit. Within the time specified, all binder deposits paid and agreed to be paid after the deduction for unpaid closing costs incurred, except inspection fees, credit reports, and appraisal fees, which shall be the buyer's sole responsibility, will be retained by the seller. So even if they don't pay the binder, the seller has a right to retain them. Okay, that means,
At closing.
no, that's not what it says. It says if buyer defaults. If the buyer defaults. Okay, so the buyer didn't make loan application. The buyer promised to put $2,000 in binder deposit. The buyer failed to put $2,000 in binder deposit. The buyer failed to make application for a loan. The buyer is now, according to paragraph 2, in default. Okay, where does this contract go at that point? The seller under paragraph 10, buyer's default, can sue the buyer for the $2,000 and collect the binder and attorney fees, likely. Okay, so this is why I say, don't let people think that just because they didn't pay the binder, that there's no need to write a cancellation because you don't have to get a binder back. Because when you write the cancellation and the seller attributes that binder back to the buyer, then because the binder wasn't paid by the buyer, he's off the hook and the seller doesn't have the right to come back and sue. Easy peasy, right? Okay. Buyer and seller will then be relieved of all obligations to each other under this agreement, except for the buyer's responsibility for the damages under paragraph 3. Again, those are the damages due to inspection and repairs. If they cut a hole in the wall to inspect something, they have to fix it. If the seller defaults under this agreement, all loan and processing fees and closing costs which were incurred by the buyer are now the responsibility of the seller. And the buyer may either seek specific performance, make them sell, okay? And you can go to a court and make them sell. I did everything right up to the day of closing and then you wanted to back out. I want you to sell. I'm obligated to pay my real estate agent, all these other things. I want you to sell. And they can go to court and force them to sell. Okay, that is called specific performance. Where was I? And the buyer's responsibility for damage resulting in the seller's default. Specific performance, or elect to receive the return of the buyer's binder deposit without thereby waiving any action for damages resulting from the seller's default. If the seller just decided to pull out, he owes all the expenses, the inspections, everything that the buyer did, the seller could be sued for, because the buyer did all that on the seller's promise that he would sell, and now he's reneging. And likewise, you get into that situation and the seller wants to walk away the day of closing, he's going to pay me too. And I'm going to sue him for it. And I'm going to sue him for your money too. You get to pay the attorney's fees. Your deal. Okay. Binder deposits retained by the seller as liquidated damage will be distributed pursuant to the terms of the listing agreement. And again, what does the listing agreement say? It Says 50% comes to us if we're the listing agent. Does the buyer's agent have any right to any of those retained binders?
No.
No, because his customer defaulted. You brought him to this mess. Okay. If the buyer fails to perform but is not in default, then he's responsible for all the costs that he incurred. And will the responsibility of the buyer with the cost deducted from the binder deposit? Remainder of the binder deposit shall be returned to the buyer. Now, he's not in default, but he did not perform. Okay. Let's see, does it give an example? It doesn't even give an example. I don't know where that would come up. This will include but not be limited to a transaction not closing because the buyer does not obtain or the required financing is approved as provided in this agreement, or the buyer invokes the buyer's right to terminate under any contingency in this agreement. Okay. However, if the buyer elects to terminate this agreement according to the paragraph 2, A, B, C, or 3, those are the appraisal clauses, and 3 is the inspection clause. Each party will be responsible for all loan and sale processing costs specified to be paid by that party, except all inspections, including WDO, will be paid by the buyer. Okay, so if he's leaving for inspection or appraisal, then they pay the cost that they would have paid. Now, generally, the title company's not going to charge anything if it doesn't go to closing. Okay, they're just out their work. It's kind of like you're out your work if you show a bunch of property to a customer and then he doesn't buy something. If the seller fails to perform but is not in default, all loan sales proceeds and closing costs incurred will be paid by the buyer, or seller will be responsibility of the seller, and a buyer will be entitled to return to the binder deposit. This will include transactions not closing because the seller elected not to pay an amount in excess of paragraph 15. That's related to a damage or casualty loss. We haven't got there yet, but it says in paragraph 15, if it's more than this, the seller doesn't have to pay it. They can cancel the agreement. That's the other event where the seller can cancel. Binder dispute and waiver jury trial. Remember what we said in the beginning? If you didn't put it with the real estate company, you wouldn't have the rights under paragraph 12. Okay, this is paragraph 12, and it says in the event of binder dispute, buyer and seller as to the entitlement to the binder deposits, the holder of the binder deposits may file an interpleader action in accordance with. But if you'll notice down here, it says escrow disbursement order from the Florida Division of Real Estate in either event. And it's not the Florida Division. I don't think it's the Florida Division of Real Estate. It's the Florida Real Estate Commission that does an EDO. Okay, so it's FREC. And FREC may be part of the Florida Division of Real Estate. In either event, buyer and seller agree to be bound thereby and indemnify and hold harmless the holder of the binder deposits from any cost or attorney fees as a result of the disbursement in accordance therewith. That is in response to the EDO. Okay, so if you don't put it with a real estate company, you don't have that get out of jail free card, and that is clearly a lawsuit. It's going to be a lawsuit. All controversies and claims between buyer, sellers, brokers, directly or indirectly arising out of a relating disagreement or this transaction will be determined by, you can't have a jury trial. No. And jury trials are used as a punitive thing by plaintiff's attorneys. We want a jury trial because they're expensive. They're expensive beyond belief. You get into a jury trial over $150,000, the trial will cost you $1 million. So they're punitive by their very impact. Okay, and this prevents that. Buyer and seller and brokers jointly and severally, knowingly, voluntarily, and intentionally waive any and all rights to the trial by jury in any litigation, action, or proceeding involving buyer and seller or brokers, whether arising directly or indirectly from this agreement or this transaction or related thereto. Each party will be liable for their own costs and attorney's fees except for interpleader attorney's fees or costs which are payable as set forth in 12A, which means they're paid out of the binder. Okay. All that makes sense? All right, it gets easier. We're on a downhill slide. We're on page 7 of 11. The rest of it's boilerplate. Property disclosure. Seller represents that the seller has no knowledge of facts that materially affect the value of the property. That's materially affect. What would a reasonable person think that a material effect to the value of the property is? If it's $1 million property, it might be $5,000, might be $10,000. If it's a $7,000 lot, $1,000 might be material. Everything's relative, okay? But that would be an argument that you would have to make, is that this materially affects the value of the property, okay? But the seller is telling you here that there are no defects except for, and if there was a defect, you'd see it here. And sometimes you'll see them right on there, see seller's disclosure, because the seller is disclosing everything about the property on that 5-page document. Seller further represents the property is not now or will not prior to the date is subject to a municipal or code enforcement proceeding. That is a municipal lien, folks. And so he's saying in this, if he doesn't mark anything there, there are no municipal liens. Okay, this is what I was telling you. If the property is subject to such a proceeding prior to the date of closing, seller shall comply with these statutes, notwithstanding and contained in said statute, seller shall be responsible for compliance with the applicable code and all orders issued in a proceeding unless otherwise agreed to herein. Seller will receive no written or verbal notice from any governmental entity as to uncorrected building environmental safety. Seller has no knowledge. The seller has received no notice. The seller has no knowledge of improvements made that are not in compliance with government regulations. So he's warranting in that, the seller is warranting in this paragraph when he signs the contract that there are no municipal liens. Okay, so see how that municipal lien becomes a little bit less worth something, because you've got teeth that you can sink into the seller if he's wrong. Energy efficiency. Yeah. It's energy efficient. Radon gas. Yeah. You know what radon gas is produced by? Granite. Okay. What kind of countertops you got in your house? Okay. So those granite countertops in your house are producing very minute amounts of radon gas. They're radioactive. Okay. And so there you have it. But what happens is in places like Pennsylvania, where they have large mountains of granite under your house, it produces enough that it could infiltrate into your basement or into your house, and the continued exposure to that radioactivity has caused health problems. It's said to have caused health. That's what that's about. Flood zone. Buyers advised that it's his responsibility to find out if it's in a flood zone. And what do you tell them? What do you as agents tell them?
Call the entrance.
Do you tell them it's not in a flood zone?
No,
Are you qualified to identify it as in a flood zone?
no.
What you can do is you can go to the MLS and you can click on the flood zones, and you can see where the little map goes around the property. And if the little map doesn't go across the property, you can say to the buyer, I don't believe this is in the flood zone, but I'm not qualified to say. According to this map, it's not in the flood zone, but you need to ask your surveyor when you get a survey if it's in a flood zone or not, because your lender's going to want to know that, and they're going to want to determine, because it's up to the buyer to do this investigation, not you. And you don't want to be the purveyor of that information because you're not an expert at that. Okay. So you're going to point him in the right direction. You can try and find resources. You can say, according to those resources, it says it's not in a flood zone, but that can't be trusted. And you want to hedge in every case that you're not a lawyer and you're not practicing law without a license, that you're not an expert on flood zones, and that your best guess is that we're going to have to get that determined by the surveyor or some other professional that offer some expertise. CDDs are easy to determine. You go and look at the tax record the tax collector's record. And if there's a CDD, it'll be shown on the tax collector's record. The only time that you won't know is on new construction because it hasn't been charged yet. Okay, but in new construction, they'll tell you, the builder will tell you that there are CDDs, or they'll tell you they're not CDDs. So not much risk there. Mold is naturally occurring. There's only a couple of kinds of mold that are dangerous, but it could be health hazard. Airport notice zones, historic districts, other. Here's one for you. Buyers should use all due diligence in regard to the neighborhood crimes, sex offenders, predators, and any other matters the buyer deems relevant in the purchase of this property. Some of those things are life sentences, folks. You can have people that turn their lives around and they're much different now, but they were deemed a sex offender because they were 16 years old and had sex with a 14-year-old girl. Okay. That happens. Okay. I'm not the purveyor of that information. If somebody wants to know, I say, look, you can go on the internet and you can look up websites that will identify those people close to you or close to your residence. But be advised, you may not be able to find a place to live because they're everywhere. There's a lot of things that have happened out there in the past, and they could be in the house right next door. And it's not neighborhood by neighborhood, folks. I mean, there are occasionally a murder in Deerwood. There's occasionally a murder in Hidden Hills. Broker's notice. You love this. Always refer them to line 396. We ain't responsible for nothing, baby. Broker and seller acknowledge and agree. Buyer and seller acknowledge and agree that neither the licensed broker nor the selling broker warrants any condition, size, square footage of the property. Neither is liable for any differences regarding the same or any loss, damages, claims, suits, costs. The seller and buyer agreed to hold us harmless and our licensees from any loss, damage, or cost out of or incurring to respect to the condition, size, square footage of the property. Broker shall not be liable for the performance of any provider of services that were recommended by the broker. Such recommendations are made as a courtesy. Buyer and seller may select their own providers of services and products. This is why I tell you, give them three choices of a home inspector. They pick one. And I will tell them, I say, look, my favorite guy is this guy, but I want you to have access and you can pick any one of these three, or you can go find your own. Possession, buyer will be given possession in closing. Buyer will be given possession within so many days after closing at no rental cost to the seller. Okay. That's pretty self-explanatory. If possession is delivered before or after closing, buyer and seller will execute a separate possession agreement. That is a pre or post occupancy agreement, and prepared by legal counsel at possessor's expense at least 5 days before closing. And I'm not sure the one that I have was prepared by counsel. It was prepared, that's all I know. Okay, I didn't do it. Seller shall sweep the property clean and remove all personal property not included in the sale at the time of the buyer's possession. Okay, so doesn't mean at closing. That means if the buyer's taking possession 10 days early, then the seller's going to have the property ready for him, swept clean, and all personal property removed. That means out of the garage, out of everywhere. Okay. Now this is kind of important. Seller represents there's no other parties in possession other than the seller. What does that mean? That means there's nobody you have to evict. Okay. That means that there's no other tenants or other people. Okay. If it is available for rent or rented, and all these things, then it tells the buyer that he's taking it.
I need to interrupt. It's an emergency.
Excuse me a minute. Be right back.
Too much to look for.
No, you're
It just, I just believe it takes time to
Yeah.
do it first.
Yeah,
I mean,
practice
you can
it,
sit
right?
here, and I'm a visual learner. I'm
Mhm.
not an auditory learner. Tell me, but until I do one, see one done, I get it.
Yeah.
I swear. And
I'm wondering if, I mean, do we have to complete all of this info, or are there like the really important parts that you can do? Because otherwise it takes forever to complete one of this. So, or complete it before
when,
here?
yeah, kind of, I mean, everything will be, if you're dealing with a buyer, you just do the same thing. When you deal with a seller, it's kind of the same.
If you're with the seller, you're on the seller side. If you're with
Yeah.
the buyer, you're on the buyer side, because like what they need to pay, what they need, you know,
Because it's the,
when they are obligated
But
to
the
do it.
buyer's-
and
The
not-
buyer's agent does this, right?
the sellers agent. Is that right?
No, the buyer's agent.
I think it's a general one.
Does
for
they make an
purchase.
offer,
Mhm. So if
and
you're
this,
working with
and it
buyers,
becomes a contract?
Right, okay.
All right, so let's not be the buyer's agent. This looks like.
Okay. Well, it's good that we've gotten close to the end, but so we can kind of wrap this up. Paragraph 15 has to do with casualty, loss, or damage. You can read that. That's the part where it says if it exceeds 3% of the purchase price, and it tells who has the right to do what. This is in the instance if they have a fire or hurricane damage, stuff like that. And it tells what remedies they have if the seller refuses to repair or that kind of stuff. Personal property, keep in mind in paragraph 16 under personal property that everything that is included in the top section is bolted to the house. That includes the shrubbery, the plants, the fence, all that stuff goes with the house. That's to be expected. Unless they list it down here as if it's specifically excluded. If your seller says, I'm taking the iron gate that belonged to my grandfather, then you would specifically exclude it from the agreement. But if you're including the refrigerator, washer, dryer, don't make that mistake. Make sure that you include it. If the buyer wants it, you go through all of these items with the buyer, make sure what they want when you're filling this out. If you miss something, you can ask, possibly do an amendment. Now, this is particularly interesting here, the addendums, riders, disclosures. If marked or the following are attached here to and made a part of this agreement, the agreement will not be deemed accepted unless all the addenda is signed. Okay. And I want you to understand that you can have all this done if you mark homeowners association community disclosure on this contract in that box, and then you don't have the homeowners association community disclosure signed, you do not have a contract. And the date of expiration that we'll get to in a little bit will make that contract go away. Okay, so my advice is don't check those boxes. Don't make them a part of this contract. When you get the community association disclosure, or unless you have it already signed when you're sending this over, then you can check that box and make it a part of this agreement. Okay, but if you think that you're not going to get some of these documents done, but you're going to need to get them done, don't check them with the contract. Leave it blank. Then when you get the document done, it's an addendum to the contract, but it does, you don't have to, you still have a contract in place. Okay. And then here's the infamous other terms and conditions at the bottom of page 9, almost to the end. And you can write lots of stuff in there. This says it's a complete agreement and everything has to be in writing. And if it's not in writing, it doesn't count. And it also affirms that the buyer and seller agree that we didn't tell them anything that's not in writing or make any assurances that we're not in writing or that we're not included in this agreement. That's what all this says. Time is of the essence. What do I always tell you? Time is of the essence. Calendar days means calendar days. You got to do it on time. You got to get these things done on time. Here's the thing that Melissa is proud of. Unless it's specified with a time, all those dates end as of 9 p.m. Eastern time, not midnight, 9 p.m. for some reason. Buyer and seller notices. They're representing they have not entered into other agreements with real estate brokers and others. This is to prevent a seller from being on the hook for a commission or having to pay 2 commissions or whatever. Yeah, I'm still here. Escrow disclosure. Buyer and seller agree that they may place funds in an interest-bearing account and that we can collect the interest, but we don't do that. But it says that we can and that they have no right to it. They agree they're going to give us a social security number. 1031 exchanges where they're entering into agreement that they're going to buy other like kind property in the next 6 months, and that they have to put the funds with a qualified intermediary. And if you get involved with that, you will have to learn the whole process. Payoff authorization authorizes us to get a payoff. FERPTA, what is FERPTA? That's foreign people, non-resident aliens, okay? They're non-US card holders, non-resident aliens. They could be subject to, they have to disclose because they could be subject to mandatory withholding until they file their tax return. Time of acceptance, got to be accepted on or before. You put the date and the time, and this is where you have to make sure that you get it accepted by that time. Otherwise, you have to amend this clause, because if a seller accepts an already expired offer, what you have is a counter offer. You do not have a contract. You may think you have a contract, but you have a counter offer. Everybody signed it, but the seller signed after the date of expiration here. Then you have a counter offer from the seller, and the seller could withdraw his counter offer and walk away, and that buyer would be out. I had this happen in an unfortunate case where they determined that this is what we had because the seller's date was after the date of expiration, and they had a better offer in their office, and they did just exactly that. They advised the seller to walk away from the contract and to accept the other offer. And there was nothing that they couldn't argue them out of it.
What's the typical time period?
Usually a couple of days. Keep in mind, if you make it too short, they'll just wait you out. You know, they're not going to necessarily, and if you make it too long, they're going to get all kinds of other offers. So it's got to be a reasonable time, but it really doesn't have a whole lot of effect. I went for years and never put anything in. Okay. And that's it. And the end of the purchase and sale agreements before our names are listed. And then it says the broker joins this agreement in evidence of the broker's consent to be bound by the provisions of paragraph 12 and 18 above. And this agreement shall not be used to modify any multiple listing service offers of compensation made by, so you can't put in this that the seller agrees to pay the buyer's agent 2.5% when it says 3% in the MLS. It's not allowed. Once they've offered 3%, they have to pay 3%. That's why there's history on the MLS too, because you can go in and look and see if they changed it after the house went under contract. You know, any questions about anything we covered? I've got to go.
We take this for when we are on the buyer's side, right?
Huh?
We were,
You would complete this as the offer for your buyer to give to the seller. Okay, this is the only thing that you do for an offer unless you're otherwise instructed. Okay, because if you get off of this and you try and make an offer any other way, you try and negotiate an offer before you write this contract, you leave holes in the agreement that you get, and you don't have any place for anybody to sign. Then by the time you get back to your agreement, you fill it all out here. Wait a minute, we didn't talk about that. We didn't talk about it. It causes all kinds of problems. So you start with this document when you make an offer. You get this filled out by the buyer, you send it over. That's the beginning of your negotiation. Okay, it's not
similar document for a seller.
No, the seller's not going to make an offer to your buyer to buy. You're going to always make an offer to the seller.
And every single time it expires, we need to.
No, not necessarily. Okay, so let's say that an hour before that expires, they make a counteroffer. Then you have 12 hours to go back and forth, and then when they sign, you're going to memorialize that in either an amendment or in the other terms and conditions with initials that the buyer and seller agree that the buyer is accepting the seller's counteroffer on such and such a date and the time of acceptance. And you can put that right in the other terms and
So
conditions.
every time there's a change to record it here as an amendment or as a,
After you get an initial contract, you're never going to touch the contract document again.
but before you agree to something.
Before you agree to something, you're
or
going to
this
go,
back and forth.
you're going to go back and forth. You can go back and forth in emails, by phone, by text.
So you
It's
don't
usually
need
better to do
change
it. You
anything.
don't need to change
Only
anything.
when it's agreed.
Once it's agreed, then you're going to make those changes, get everybody to initial the changes and sign the document. Then you have a contract. Then after that, you don't touch that contract again. You're going to do everything else by amendment. Once you have a contract, you want that to be ironclad. I've got to go. Thank you all for your kind attention. Really appreciate it.